but good evening and welcome to Voices of the Wilderness 2021. My name is Bill Hodge, with the great honor of serving as the Executive Director of the Bob Marshall Wilderness Foundation. And we're really excited to bring you tonight's program, and certainly has been an adventure to have these events in the last couple of years as we've all been living through the pandemic. This year has been fun. We kicked off Voices of the Wilderness with Ghost Stories of the Bob a couple weeks ago at Lake Baked and Big Fork. And cannot tell you all how excited we are that we had 175 folks show up that night for a fun night of ghost stories and bonfires and s'mores and lots of other great times. And the support means so much to us. So thanks for coming out for that event that night. And thanks for being here tonight for this event, our conversation with our Artist Wilderness Connection community. And we'll get to the conversation here in just a minute. This event is part of our Voices of the Wilderness end of year celebration, and that includes our silent auction, which opened 2 weeks ago tomorrow night, and will close tomorrow night at 9 o'clock Mountain Time. So if you're not in that auction, you should hop in there. I will put a link in the chat box here in just a minute. It's really easy to find. Also, if you just go to our website, which is bmwf.org, BMWF as in Bob Marshall Wilderness Foundation.org. And you'll see a banner at the top that'll take you there. But again, I'll also put a link in the chat box so that you can go there, and it'll take you to the auction, which again has a little over 24 hours left in it. I guess about 26 hours left in the silent auction. And we, again, cannot thank our community enough for your support through the auction, through coming out for events like this. It is through events like this and through your support that we're able to do the work that we do at the Bob Marshall Wilderness Foundation, which is a role of active wilderness stewardship. It's being a partner with our friends at the United States Forest Service and caring for the Bob Marshall Wilderness Complex. That complex, 1.5 million acres of not just the best of Montana, the best of our country. It is a spectacular place, and we're just thrilled to be able to be a part of stewarding that place, keeping the trails accessible and open, trying to eliminate weeds that are maybe degrading the natural condition of the place, and just in general, providing educational opportunities so people have a connection to the complex and what the whole National Wilderness Preservation System means here in Montana and across our country. Bob Marshall himself was almost single-handedly, not quite, but almost single-handedly responsible for the wilderness preservation system we have today. And we're also honored to be able to carry his name within our name as partners caring for the complex that began bearing his name in 1940, a year after his death. So enough about that. If you want to find out more about what we do, you can go to bmwf.org and explore all of that. You'll also find, if you want to maybe be one of these artists in this presentation in the year of the future, how you can go about doing that. But I want to highlight that our Artist Wilderness Connection program is not just a function of the Bob Marshall Wilderness Foundation. We are just one of several partners that make that happen. And I'm really honored that we get to work with the Flathead National Forest and their staff on pulling this together. Also, Swan Valley Connections, and of course, the Hockaday Museum of Art in Kalispell. It's that four-way partnership that makes it possible for us to create these opportunities for these artists to go in and find inspiration through time spent in a place as special as the Bob. Now, somebody who's well more versed at talking to these artists and exploring their journey in the Bob is my friend and board member for the Bob Marshall Wilderness Foundation, Corrie Williamson. Corrie has done a residency herself, a writing residency. She is an environmentalist, she is a writer, she's an educator, and she's an important part of our team at the Bob Marshall Wilderness Foundation. And I'm going to let Corrie take us through this journey with our artists tonight, and I'll be here paying attention to the Q&A box, which is how, if you want to ask questions, if you move your cursor at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little box that says Q&A. If you have a question for one or all of the artists, make sure you put it in there, and Corrie and I will be paying attention to that. And with that, I'll turn it over to Corrie, and welcome everybody.
Thanks so much, Bill. And thanks everybody for being here, all the participants and these artists who I'm really, really excited to talk to. As Bill mentioned, I have not yet been able to do a Bob residency. I hope to at some point, but I did have a wilderness writing residency in 2020 that was far and away one of the greatest gifts of my life. And I just love that this is a program that's part of the Bob Marshall Wilderness Foundation story. So I'm so excited to talk to these three. And I'm gonna do a quick introduction of each of them so you know who you've got with us tonight, and then I'll lob an introductory question their way to kick us off. So just in alphabetical order, we have Michael Garrigan tonight. Michael is a poet who writes and teaches along the Susquehanna River in Pennsylvania. Also big thanks to Michael because he's on Eastern time and it's late there and it's a school night. So please forgive us our Mountain Time centrism, Michael. But he loves exploring riverlands and believes that every watershed should have a poet laureate. He's the author of 2 poetry collections, Robbing the Pillars and What I Know How to Do. And he was a 2020 artist resident, so this past summer at the Spruce Cabin. We've also got Eden Hall with us. Eden is a sculptural artist who works in bronze. She lives in the high mountain desert in Colorado, and she was a 2019 artist in residence, also at the Spruce Park Cabin. And then we've got James Weikert, and James is an artist and architectural designer who's based out of Bozeman. He's an avid hiker and explorer and finds inspiration for his paintings in the mountains and forests of the Northern Rockies. And James was also a 2021, this past summer, resident, and he spent 2 weeks at the Granite cabin. So let's hear from them. So to kind of kick us off, I want to ask each of you to share or describe something from your time in the Bob that has really stayed with you. So this could be a little story or an anecdote. It could just be a single visual image. It could be the name of the one-eyed mule that packed you into your cabin, something that's hanging on kind of sharp and bright in your mind. So maybe I'll lob this one to James to get us started. James, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. The one thing that sticks into my mind as an artist was from the second that I looked at the Middle Fork, I saw the most amazing deep teal blue color in the river that I've never seen before. And there was something really captivating about that and stuck with me when I was out there, and it's still sticking with me because I'm going to try to paint that. And I think it's going to be really tough, if not impossible, to try to recreate that exact color. But that was a big thing. And another thing was just the importance of making time and blocking out time to be creative. And I'm lucky if I get 45 minutes since I've been home. But when I was out there, I realized that, wow, if I have 2-3 hours uninterrupted, I can churn out a lot of interesting stuff and really work on my paintings, my sketches in a way that it's really tough to do. So those are the things that have really stuck with me.
Awesome, thanks. Eden, what do you think?
Well, it was hard. I read your question. It was hard to pinpoint just one, but there was one night, there was a thunderstorm, and it was kind of back behind Spruce Cabin. It was just booming and raging and carrying on. And there was a lot of change in the air. It was probably 10 days in to my residency. And I just had the door open and listened to the rain. The rain fell steady for hours. And it was the most simultaneously safe and like violent feeling because this storm was just carrying on. And I just sat in there and drank coffee and just listened to the rain. I didn't even create anything. I was just there. And you know, that's a night I'll never, ever, ever forget. So it was cool. That's it.
Yeah, Eden, I had something very similar happen to me, Eden. Like it was, I think day 11 or 12, and it hadn't rained for the whole time I was there. And I was sitting on that ledge at Middle Fork that overlooks, or at the edge of Spruce Park that overlooks Middle Fork. And like for a solid 20 minutes, I kept hearing this sound that I thought were voices. And then I realized that there was a thunderstorm behind me because I thought I was hearing people. And I turned around, and there was just like this gigantic thunderhead right above the cabin. And it was, I did the same thing. I went and sat on the porch and just let the storm come. And it was an incredible experience. I just sat there and watched it rain for, an hour.
Yeah, it's like, awesome. All this is going on out there, but here you are in your little spot, and that's all that matters, right?
And Michael, you came just after some fires, right? Weren't you there just after some pretty bad weather and smoke? And yeah.
Yeah, and it was definitely like a quenching. Like it was dry when I was out there. It was wildfire haze like every day. So to have that rain come was just, it was joyous in a lot of ways. Yeah.
It was kind of the opposite for me. It was just crystal clear blue skies, and then this big storm hit, and the rain came to where I was, but then there were fires close by. So after that, this kind of a haze built in, and it stayed in until I left. So it was just like this pivotal moment that, yeah, it was magical.
That's cool. Yeah, when you're out there like that, it's hard not to kind of get really wrapped up in the elements and the raw weather.
Yeah, I don't think I slept all night. I need all that coffee, right?
Oh, I love it. So I feel like we started to kind of get to this already, but I want to ask you about solitude. And I feel like when I would tell people about my residency, they'd have like one of three reactions. They'd either get it right away and they'd be like, oh, you're so lucky, or they'd be like, you're so crazy, or you're so brave. And I think that solitude is a big part of that reaction, and probably takes a little bit of all three of those things. But I want to ask you guys to describe like the impact of solitude, and particularly solitude in the context of wilderness, on your work or your creative thinking, and like why would you seek out a solitude experience like that? And whoever wants to start can just jump in.
Oh,
I guess
go ahead, Michael.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right. So I feel like, yeah, you're right, Corey. It was all of those things. It was the toughest thing for me to handle when I was out there, was the solitude. It wasn't the elements. It wasn't being off the grid or the being dirty or the grizzlies. Like all of that I was okay with, but it was definitely the inability to talk to people when I wanted to talk or connect with somebody. I would leave the Forest Service radio on all day just so I could hear the banter back and forth between like Spotted Bear and the fire lookouts, and like hear what's going on at Schaefer Meadows, like just so I could feel like involved with some sort of human element. But I also felt like the solitude forced me to like focus on my work. You know, I loved how it forced me to be present in the moment. Like creatively speaking, I went out there trying to just gather. I wanted to use that experience to gather ideas and experiences. And as much as I would have loved to share that with somebody, I think being there alone let me just kind of embrace that aspect on a day-to-day basis, on a daily basis. And it helped me, it pushed me a lot, you know, it pushed me like emotionally and spiritually and creatively to kind of write from a place of vulnerability, because I was alone out there. So, yeah.
Yeah, I would echo that exact same thought process, Michael. Before I went in, my thought was, I'm either going to absolutely love this or I'm going to absolutely hate it. And that prior to this, I had only done, I think, a 3-day, 2-night backpacking trip solo, and I hated it. I got into my own headspace and I couldn't get out. So the solitude was, it could have gone either way. Luckily, after about 5 days, I got into a really good rhythm, and I don't know, something happened. I got it. And just like you said too, the focus was intense. And part of being in the wilderness is, I think, for me at least, everything was heightened. I'm pretty paranoid. Every time I was outside the cabin, sometimes when I was in the cabin, I was always aware of every sound, every smell. Oh, it suddenly got humid because I posted a little picture on Instagram, but the whole side of Granite cabin has grizzly bear claw marks all over it. So it's something that I was very aware with, and it was another level of being focused that really helped my art and really helped me understand everything about the place that I was at.
Yeah,
I completely understand that. And I think the first 4 days, yeah, like you said, they were really intense. I kind of made an analogy toward, like, I jumped in the river every day to swim, and
Yep.
And it was that anticipation of what it's going to feel, like once you're in the water, right? But it's standing up there and like, okay, I'm going to jump. That's kind of what it felt like the first 4 days. And you realize all your structure, your comfort zones, all the little things you fall back on to maybe buffer yourself from yourself, or yourself from going too far into your wherever you go, or all those silly little structures that we as artists keep in place. Because I was always told, you know, don't spend too much time inside your own head, you know, make sure you get out and talk to people. And as artists, we're always in our own head. We're always just working and our brain's going, and we're accustomed to that. But we have the ability to just walk outside and get a cup of coffee or whatever and talk to somebody, you know. And so, like, I'd always carve out solitude to work in at home, and here it found me. It was like everything was reversed. And once you take that plunge, it's all good. But that first few days, it was like, you know, it was intense, like you say. And then, like, you sit on the rock after you swim, and it's warm and it's cozy, and then things start to filter in. So, you know, it's like you said, Corrie, you can't really explain it to people. People either get it or they don't. But it definitely has stayed with me forever. Like the experience of that solitude is permanent, I think, in my work, in the way I operate. So.
I did the same thing, Eden. There's that great, awesome swimming hole right behind Spruce Park.
Great.
Amazing. Yeah. And it like the solitude in a way, like, you're right. Like, I would do that every day at like 4, just because it was so hot, but also it became a ritual. And like, I think being alone and being in solitude kind of like lets you enter into those rituals, or like create those rituals that you would otherwise be distracted from. And that's what I just like by like day 4 or 5, you find those, okay, these are my rituals. You know, I'm going to do this every day. I'm going to do this every day, or I'm going to do something different, but I can make it sacred in some way. And yeah, and you're right. I think as artists, we get into our own heads a little bit. And I think that's what's being alone in a wilderness. Like I don't know, it was so easy for me to like get out of my head, because there's just so much vastness around, like so much to get into that wasn't myself. You know, I could, you know, hike up a mountain, or I could go up Middle Fork. I could just stare at a deep pool of this beautiful, all these colors, and try to understand them all. There was plenty of great distractions.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's like you focus on just being rather than creating, and then everything was reversed. The polarity of how I approached work was completely reversed.
One thing I noticed, and Micah, you just spoke about this, is just speaking to someone became almost a privilege. And I remember I'm not one to run up to people and start a conversation, especially when I'm backpacking on the trail. But I remember, I think it was going into the second weekend, I hadn't seen anyone for a few days. So it was wearing on me more than I thought. And I heard the rumble of horses or people, and I shot out of the cabin really happy, and probably scared them because I was so bubbly. I was like, hey guys, how are you doing? You want to talk? Which it was, I never do that. So yeah, like you were saying, Ian, that's a reversal for me, where I sort of I really enjoyed the little pieces of conversation and community that I got when I was out there. It's really interesting.
Yeah, I found that conversations were way different with the people that stumbled in. Sometimes I actually hid from people, I'll admit, because I didn't know how to talk to them. But other people, I was like, I just found myself talking to them differently. Maybe they thought I was some crazy chick in the woods. I don't know, but I got more out of my conversations too than I normally did.
Yeah, when I was, my residency was on the Rogue River in Oregon. And so the only people I would see would be whitewater rafters, like going down the river. And I would just be like sitting on the beach, like the rocky beach, with my like old dog, who clearly had not like hiked the 40 miles in that he would have needed to get there. And people would be like, where's your boat? Like, what are you doing here? And I'd be like, I live here. And people would be so confused. It was such a delight to like, to be able to confuse people that way and have that little ritual of interacting with people, which changes so much when you're not around people all the time, and the obligations to be social that you have change, and and the whole way you think about those interactions change.
Totally.
It's funny, some people that I talked to just called me the artist. Oh,
Yeah.
You're the artist living at
Yes,
Granite. Yeah, I guess I am.
Okay. This one woman showed up and she was lost. She had missed her turn and she was terrified. And she came across me and I think I freaked her out just because she was scared, you know, and I showed her a map and I got her back on track. But I thought, what do I look like to these people? You know what I mean? Because at this point, who knows what I look like, you know? And I'll never forget the look on her face. She was like, what the hell are you doing out here? You know?
But she was probably so grateful to see you.
She was. She wanted to prove to her boyfriend she could go on this hike. And I was like, well, you did it. You did like 4 times as much more than you said you would. You know, you went way out here. But it was a neat thing. I just remember everybody that stopped so much more than I do like all the people I met today in town or whatever. Each one of those people are ingrained in my memory.
That's a good point. I ran into one of the days, the father and son came by and we chatted for a second and they said, about 10 years ago, we were here and we met another artist and we helped her get set up. And it was, I think her name was Lauren Graybell. And I thought that was really an interesting circle. I was like, oh, okay, well, I'm doing the same thing 10 years later. So that was,
That's cool.
just like you said, yeah, I remember these faces and names from the people that I talked to, which, yeah, I normally wouldn't. They would just be people I passed by on the trail, but there was something about being out there that made it a lot more special.
Yeah.
Mhm. There's
there's
great.
No, go ahead, Corey.
There's a great question in the Q&A, which is sort of question/comment from Amy. Thanks, Amy, for this question. Amy says, I wonder if we create the rituals in solitude in the wilderness because there's nothing else to do, or if we create the rituals because we have the space to do it. Or maybe it doesn't matter, but the fact of the matter is that rituals seem to get created. And I love that. I feel like she got it. That was my experience, was that like all these little obligations that are so normally part of my like inner monologue and my day and like what my brain is doing. That's like, oh, I have to pay this bill. Like, you know, I call my mother, which is a wonderful obligation, but still an obligation, right? Like all these little things that we just sort of have to do and think about, like they go away. And then what do you fill that space with? And maybe that's a ritual of looking or thinking or being, or maybe that's listening to the radio, or maybe that's, you know, part of the process and part of your.
I think those things sort of, for me at least, it happened very organically. You know, these mundane tasks that such as getting water in the morning, it became really enjoyable. Like the very basic things you need to do took on a new meaning of. If I want water today, I got to go get water. If I want to, you know, not attract bears, I have to make sure I have a clean cabin. So all these rituals, I think, maybe came out of necessity, maybe out of function, but I think in a very organic way.
Mm-hmm. I think also with ritual too, or those tasks that you do, like, you know, solitude isn't separation, you know, and so when you're alone, you have the space or the time to create deeper connections, I think, with the things around you, and which I think also emphasizes those ritualistic things like getting water in the morning, or just sitting on the ledge and watching the sunrise or the sunset, or going swimming in the river every afternoon.
And I think too, like these rituals for me were based on such primitive things, such as like staying away from the flies, finding that place to work where the flies weren't going to bother me, and then rotating when the sun hit that spot and it was no longer shaded. You know, just such basic things became almost like a sacred task, you know, and like our rituals they mean something, even though they've become more simple, you know, and I just, that part too hasn't left me, but yeah, like, I realized, like, you know, we're all creatures of habit, and animals are, and I realized how much like animals we really are if we settle into just surviving out there. I mean, surviving with our fully stocked cabin, but still yet surviving, you know, and surviving as artists, should I say, because we're out there to create. And yeah, I just found rituals to be totally important. And that's that afternoon swim.
Mm-hmm.
No, you don't miss that, you know.
I love the idea of a sacred task. And actually that's a nice segue into another question that just popped up in the Q&A, which was, did anyone pray? If so, was it more, same, less than usual? And I'm going to mess this up, but I feel like there's a Mary Oliver quote that's what it is, like, attention is the beginning of devotion. Is that, did I get that right, Michael? You're not. And I thought about that so much, like when I was out there, like that just noticing is like worship in a way, right? That is sort of like a divine task or a sacred task. But I'll pass that question on to anybody that wants to respond to it too. Did anyone pray? If so, was it more, same, less than usual?
I'm not really a spiritual person, but every time I went on a hike, and I was really hoping and I guess praying that I wouldn't encounter a bear about 10 feet away from me, just because it's a different landscape up there than I'm used to. And
Yeah.
Bozeman area is drier, not as much dense underbrush. There, it is very dense, and it gets a little scary, I'll be honest. So, and that's, I don't know if that's the answer that exactly what the commenter was looking for, but that's as close as I came to it.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, my prayers looked a lot like just it depended on what the context. Like, so creatively, like gathering for me was a prayer, just gathering what I like, the experiences and the senses and what I was doing. But fishing, I fished all day, every day almost. So that was a prayer to me in a lot of ways, just casting the same purple fly over and over again and catching cutthroat and whitefish. But going back to what James said, I think also hiking and singing songs really loudly was also one of my favorite prayers, because I was also very scared of running into grizzlies or whatever else, or bear. So I sang a lot of Warren Zevon songs and at the top of my lungs. And I don't think anyone heard me, but I didn't run into. I saw one grizzly, but it was when I was fishing, not when I was hiking. So the prayer worked, I think, for the most part.
Good.
I agree. I mean, I didn't really pray in a traditional sense, but like I felt like everything I did was a form of like a sacred task. But yeah, one time in hiking, for some reason, when you get away from your cabin and you go out on these adventures, you're even more vulnerable than you are, because we're humans. We make our little nests no matter where we are, and you take that away and you go on these. I hiked every day, but there was one time I went across the river and up on that mountain, and I can't remember the name of the mountain. And
Was it Spruce Point?
Was it Spruce Point? I think I went downriver, crossed, and then went all the way up. I can't remember the name of it. I'm sorry, but that was a pretty. It wasn't like I was so freaked out and I made it up there and I didn't see a bear. It wasn't like an adrenaline moment, but it was a very spiritual moment. It was just like this. Like everything was pretty complete when I was up there, and I could see down to the cabin and I could see everywhere. And I had to give thanks. I just was so thankful to be there. And I mean, I'm not a traditionally religious person at all, but I just felt really grateful and like just happy to be alive. That's basically what it was. I was really inspired by that place. So. I don't know if that answers the question, but.
It was an answer. so yeah. I wanted to, a couple of people have been asking in the Q&A sort of about like process, right? And, how did this experience affect your day to day? And that's something I wanted to hear from you all about too. Like, how do you usually work? When do you usually work? And like, did being off grid and being in the wilderness challenge or disturb or change that in some way? And has any of that kind of like stayed with you after the residency?
Yeah, I'll try and tackle that, because process is a huge thing for me outside the wilderness or inside the wilderness. Sculpture is a really process heavy thing, especially bronze. I mean, you basically make the same piece 3 times and then you tweak it. I tweak it at every phase. So how it affected me, obviously I can't create bronze in the wilderness. So I was a gatherer, kind of like Michael was saying. I just gathered everything. I gathered objects, I gathered thoughts, I gathered photographs, pigments, pollens, colors, I mean, everything. It redefined process for me in a huge, huge way. Because you get set in your process, the way you work. I'm going to make the sculpture out of clay, I'm going to mold of it, and then I'm going to make a wax of it, and I'm going to make a bronze of it. And it just threw all that up in the air. It was just chaos. I mean, I had rocks and plants and colors. It was just chaos. And I loved it. And it really freed me up to continue that outside. Because bronze is a very traditional, old form of working. And I don't just work in bronze, but it always tends to be bronze because the way it can flow and just kind of capture a moment, capture all the processes and experiences into something that can literally exist forever. So to be able to kind of shake that up a bit was really cool. It's like, and I won't get all technical on you, but just, yeah, it stayed with me. Just kind of rethinking the whole way I create that initial sculpture, which eventually becomes a bronze. So.
Yeah, disruption is good. And I do oil, and I'm fairly messy in my studio. So from the beginning, there was no way that I was going to try to pack in all my oils, all my solvents, canvases. That just wouldn't have worked. And then at the end of it, I would have had to try to pack out drying paintings. I mean, that wasn't an option for me. So, just like you said, Eden, gathering is a great word for it. I've got 100 pages of notes here that I gathered, and I don't know what to do with them, but it's going to be something. And I got back into sketching, which was probably one of the more beneficial exercises I did, because that's something I don't give myself time to do. And I'm usually, how fast can I do this? I need to get these paintings done. And out there, I got to just sketch for 3 to 6 hours a day. And that's a skill that, just like a pencil, if you don't keep it sharp, you're going to lose it. And I didn't realize that until I tried to sketch, and was like, man, it took me several days to get back into it. And eventually I did get into it. I really liked the things that I sketched, but it was a totally different way about the process of how I work.
I get that. I totally get that.
Yeah. For me as a writer, I like we were talking earlier before the Zoom started, how with writers, it's so easy to, all we need is pen and paper. We don't have a lot of equipment to bring. So for my process, I try to write every day anyway, but when I was out there, it really helped me focus on that. I really got to devote my time. So I would wake up, going back to ritual, I'd wake up every morning and make a whole big French press of coffee, and I'd sit on that ledge and watch the sun kind of hit the top of the mountains and work all the way down to the river. That was probably about 90 minutes to 2 hours of sitting there. And that was my writing time every morning. I would just sit there and write. And then when I got the sun on my back, it means it was time for me to go out and hike and fish or do whatever, explore. And then I would come home and swim in the river. And then I'd do the same thing, just watch the sunset behind that same, mountain that it touched in the morning. I would just watch it set. And then I had about 90 minutes to 2 hours of that dusk light, and I would just sit there and write for 2 hours. So that was really good for my process, because I would just then spend the in-between moments, it was all gathering, right? But then it was kind of processing on the bookends of the day. I think the biggest change for me was as a writer, I'm very much oriented towards revising and tweaking my writing and editing. That's a very large part of my process, but I didn't do that at all out there. I had a poetry manuscript. I was like, I'm going to finish this. I'm going to tweak it out there. And I had it with me, and I looked at it once, and I'm like, no, that's not where my headspace is right now. I'm not looking in the past, not the past, but I'm not looking at other work that I've already created. I want to be in the moment, creating stuff in this place, of this place, affected by this place. And it just felt, that was the biggest change for me. It was just more of just jotting down ideas and filling up, a moleskin notebook of images and words instead of revision and stuff.
So, Michael, I like the way that you said that you went home, you came home. And I think on day 11 was the first time I wrote down in my journal, it's like, day 11, I feel like I live here now. And that was a big thing for me. I don't know, Eden, is that something you experienced too?
Oh, totally. I still call it my home. I was like, oh yeah, when I went to my cabin. I'm like, yeah, it's not my cabin, but it's always my home. And as far as process goes too, like when I start a piece, I feel like I'm kind of feeling around in the dark till I grab something and then it starts to evolve. And I'm in my studio and I'm trying to like channel in experiences I've had or memories or, but out there it was so reversed. It was just like, I kind of abandoned the need to control where my work was going.
Yeah.
And it started just controlling me. Like I wasn't managing time was managing me. And it was hard to let that go. In those first few days, it was terrifying because like, no, this is because you're dealing with some pretty raw stuff, and so the process conceptually was craziness. It was great. But like you said, Michael, I was going to work on this, no, screw that. Everything's going to come in the way it wants to. And there's nothing I can control or do about it. I'm just going to ride it out. And I think that's why we stick to our rituals and our like, chores, because we're kind of at the mercy of the wilderness working on us instead of us going to the wilderness or us getting something from the wilderness. It's working within us. So it was, and I wrote a lot like you did, Michael. I mean, it was my way of like talking because I had nobody to talk to. So I would just, instead of my thoughts kind of like piling up in my head, I just jot them down. So basically, I would say the mass volume of what I produced out there was writing, and two-dimensional stuff, which is, like you said, you got to keep that pencil sharp. And I definitely hadn't. I hadn't drawn for years or painted, and I had a blast doing it. So yeah, everything was new.
I think that's what's one of the great things about this artist wilderness connection is that, James, you touched on this earlier when you had mentioned there was an artist there 10 years ago, and this idea of home, and it is kind of our home, but it's also a shared home that like, I went in there and I could see like Ted Hansen, who was a painter, left one of his paintings there. And like, there was a space of creativity there. And like, over these years that they've been doing this residency, it's just like this, I feel so grateful that I got a chance to share that home with those other artists that have, and also the trail crew members and the rangers that have used that home as well. But like, there's this shared creative home out in the middle of the wilderness, which I think is a pretty amazing thing to think about. It makes me very grateful that exists out there,
How were the mice, the rats? Did you share with them?
Sharing a home with mice, yes. I tried to come to a truce with the mice, but I couldn't. I had to take care of them because they got pretty rowdy one night, and it was pretty rough. It was bad. No pack rats.
As many as I could, as fast as I could.
Yeah. There was a pack rat in the woodshed that was pretty big and burly, but luckily there was no pack rat in Spruce Park cabin. So, but yeah.
I had a pack rat that I referred to as the downstairs neighbor that every day, one of my rituals or chores was I'm going to plug up every hole in this foundation, because that thing would on cue at about midnight start doing whatever it does and keep me up till about 2. So this first few nights were not good sleep. And then I finally, after a few days, got everything plugged up and had 2 nights of silence and thought I won. And then soon after that, I heard it again. So I just decided, you know what, we're going to share this space, and that's that. But no mice, but just a really overexcited pack rat.
I shouldn't tell you this, but I've never seen a pack rat. I mean, I was living in Iowa at the time. We didn't have pack rats. And this thing, I don't know if, Michael, that back door of the cabin, it's got that screen mesh door. You'd climb up there and like just shake it all night long. I'm like, what is this thing? So I ended up killing my pack rat. I'm really ashamed to say, because I finally saw him and I'm like, those things are actually pretty darn cute, you know, but after that I slept really well. But I didn't know what I was trapping until I got it. Yeah, there's one less pack rat in the world.
There's one that took
I
its
didn't
place
share,
later.
James. I'm sorry.
That's right. Well, you need solitude when you're out there.
Right, you need sleep too, right?
Exactly. There's so many good questions from the audience coming in. I just want to like scrap all of mine. And one, I think we're like edging up to this with these ideas about like rituals and homes. But Liz asked, I'm curious if and how your relationship with the wilderness shifted over the residency, or your relationship with pack rats, or, you know, what. Maybe pack rats are the overarching symbol. And I think you guys are touching on that a little bit, but that's such a nice question. And I want to see if you have some thoughts about that.
I mean, for me, it's one of those things where I kind of re-established a connection to the wilderness after kind of being away from it for a couple of years. And now I'm already looking forward to, okay, when can I get back out into a wilderness area, whether it's the Bob or somewhere else? Like, it's become apparent to me that it's a necessity. You know, it has to become a place I go to as much as I can, but at least yearly, you know, just to go out there and kind of lose myself a little bit, and to not be the top of the food chain, you know, and to be vulnerable and to be in a place that's completely wild, and so much the place that's least like us, right? You know, that pushes us out of our comfort zone. So
yeah, I got to do a lot of reading when I was out there, probably the most reading I have ever done. Rebecca at Bob Marshall Wilderness Foundation gave me the book on Bob Marshall, which was fantastic to read. I only knew surface information about him. And I was also, a friend of ours gave me this book to read called Driven Wild, which is, it outlines the beginning of what would become the Wilderness Act and the Wilderness Movement. And it was really interesting to see why we have wilderness now. And from this, it was all about the fear of, we're going to lose this, the fear of consumerism, the fear that automobiles are going to take over. And I think that's still prevalent today. I mean, we're still seeing the places we love being loved to death, and Yellowstone thinking about maybe banning cars for buses. And being out there really made me believe how alive this is and how important it is to preserve what we have, because not every place has it. And I was lucky enough to grow up in the Northeast, where we do have wilderness and forest still intact, but a lot of people don't. So I felt very fortunate to get to spend that much time out there and to have the time to read about. I'm a history geek, so I love reading about how these things came to be.
I think this is a tough question. That's a big question, but it's a really big question. I guess as I was growing up, I mean, I spent a lot of time on trips with my parents in the wilderness, and it was kind of a little bit of an existential childhood, but wilderness was the only thing that really made sense to me in like a very unquestioning way. And that stuck with me throughout life. So I've always obviously been drawn to going back to it for that. But this experience kind of showed me that where my role was as a human, or maybe, I mean, it's kind of arrogant to say as a species, because I don't speak for the species, obviously, but I thought of myself as a human in the wilderness, and what that was as just another species. It was very, very humbling, incredibly humbling. And I felt like I learned what my job was. Like I remember I kept seeing this black bear. Like I'd go out pick huckleberries, and he or she, I don't know what it was there picking huckleberries, or it was on fishing, and I was sitting there doing my thing, and he just kept looking at me like, oh, you again, you know? And I thought, this thing's trying to survive, and I'm just, what am I doing? You know, I'm not surviving. I can eat whatever. I'm obviously got it pretty cushy compared to this bear, but my role was as an artist in this wilderness, and we all have our jobs, and, you know, we all survive. It's all about survival, you know, like this animal surviving, like James, you do your architecture, you know, you do your work. Our work as artists is our method of surviving. And it's all kind of translated to me out there in a way that made perfect sense. And it was incredibly humbling because obviously we have a bigger brain. What our work is different than this bear, but yet it's a necessity to us. And so that was my new take on it, basically. I guess, if that makes any sense. It's a hard question to answer because it's pretty intense.
I think that made a lot of sense to people in this call.
That could be 2 hours on its own.
Right, I know.
Right,
All
right?
these questions probably could be. I know. I think when I left my wilderness experience, I feel like I was in this sort of like long, still like almost, you know, almost a year out, like state of gratitude.
Yeah.
Just because how can you not be? And to have these rituals and to think about the story that you're part of and these connections. And yeah, I love what you're saying, Eden, just about sort of, yeah, being in the presence of the thing and how what we're doing is its own form of survival.
Yeah.
I like that so much. So there are like all these other great questions coming in, but I want to make sure that we have time to do something I'm really excited about, which is to have everybody share something that they created or that was inspired by their time in the Bob and in their residency. And let's see, I've got a particular question in the Q&A for you, Eden, from Coulter, who said, can you interpret your contributed piece a little for us? The eagles, the horse's front leg, the survey marker, and nail. How do they represent your residency experience? So I don't know if that's one that you were planning to show, but
I can't because Coulter has it. It's in
the that's why he knows it so well.
If you want to see it, it's at the Hungry Horse Ranger Station, and it is a beautiful piece.
Thank you, Bill.
You know, when I was making it, I thought of Coulter a lot. I thought, this is going in Coulter's collection. And when she gave me a tour of her collection, I was like, wow, this woman's a collector. You know, this woman's got it going on. And I'm eternally thankful to Coulter. But so yeah, the piece, I can't show you the piece, but it's basically a bronze base with a rock, which I took from the river, and a nail, a big nail, which I found in the corral there where they had burned whatever they had burned, probably fence posts, whatever. Anyway, I live on a farm and I pick up nails, you know, that's what we do because I have horses and stuff. So I picked up a lot of nails and I took a few, I'll admit. And then it's supported by all these little eagle heads. And they all kind of have this expression, like there's this huge weight, this massive weight of this rock, which is, you know, just the sheer impenetrability of the wilderness. The rock faces, the granite, the heavy weight, you know, of this, the untouchability, we can't come near it. And it's supported by these little eagle heads, and each eagle has a eye, which is a huckleberry. And I just kind of like sculpted it. I always have to I keep my hands busy, you know, and I had clay and huckleberries were a big part of my residency, right? Pancakes every morning, and it was just huge. And I painted with them, and I wanted to represent the huckleberry. So the eagles, there was a pair of eagles. I don't know if you saw them, Michael, but they were nesting right there. And, you know, they'd always do these flybys. Even when I was hiking, I'd see them. And so this piece was kind of a collage of all these symbols. And it's not typically the way I work. I just kind of make organic forms and go with it. But, you know, the call to create a piece out of this experience is almost as intense as the experience itself, because you want to represent it as much. And I wanted to give thanks back to the people who gave me this opportunity. So in the front of this rock is this leg, horse leg coming out. And the whole time I was there, I missed my horse. I missed the ability to travel on horseback. And I completely understood that none of this would have been possible without horses and mules. And I thought about Andy, who packed me in and since died, and Bud. It was Andy, Chuck, and Bud has since passed too. So I kept thinking of Andy's horse. It was this Percher and Morgan cross horse, big gray, awesome horse. And I used to be a farrier, so I always look at horses' feet. And this horse had the most beautiful feet. He was just massive. And the sculpture doesn't show that horse, but it's the same. It's a symbol of that, and to pay honor to the horse, because without them, horse and mule, I wouldn't be there. The cabin wouldn't be there. None of that would have happened. So as a whole, all the symbols work together, and the nail is kind of an homage to the Forest Service crew and all the work they do to keep this functioning, and just like the practicality of it all, and how our impact as humans affects this wilderness. Because I mean, the nail doesn't actually go through the rock, but it looks like it does. I actually cut it, and then, you know, it's kind of a technical thing, but drilling through that rock is kind of a pain. So yeah, that's what it's about. Hope that it helps.
We'll all have to make a pilgrimage to see
Right.
that.
There's a lot going on in that piece. Oh, and then there's the river too. There's the color. I was trying to find, like James was saying, that color. And patina, it was pretty cool to find that. So
Very cool. Michael, do you want to, I know you've got a poem, and then
Yeah,
James will share
sure.
something, and I'll share a poem, and yeah,
Cool.
we'll do this.
Eden, you brought up our four-legged friends. I just want to give a shout out to Morley. I love Morley. He was
Yeah.
like spirit guide. I followed him in and out. He was like, you know, he was at the back of the line. I was behind him, and I think about Morley almost every day. He has such a good soul, and also Frank. So thank you, Frank, if you're out there, and your mules. They're just such an incredible part of that experience was that going in and out.
yeah.
Yeah, and I don't have a piece. I'm working on a piece right now, kind of for or about Morley. So hopefully someday that'll, get out there. But yeah. So for this poem I wrote, I wanted to write a poem that kind of honored the place, the Middle Fork of the Flathead, but also like to act as kind of a totem for like the larger conservation legacy that you folks at the Bob Marshall Wilderness Foundation, the Flathead, that you are working towards to like save, like kind of keep these places wild. Spruce Park, like the cabins up on this ledge, and I'm probably gonna get the dates on. I think in the 50s or 60s, they were gonna plan on putting a dam there to dam the Middle Fork. And, thanks, I think partially to like the Wilderness Act and the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, like they didn't put the dam there. And now we still have this wild place. And I think I learned about that in my orientation. I think Coulter was telling me about that. So thank you for that. Cause that kind of stuck with me, this idea that like I'm here in this wilderness because of a conservation and stewardship ethic, and this larger idea of what the importance of wilderness that started long before me. And I wanted to show gratitude towards that and honor that kind of conservation legacy. So yeah, I wrote this poem. It's called River Theology, and I'm hoping to use this as my donated piece. My good friend Andrew Jones kind of designed this broadside for it. So I'm hoping to have it framed and donate a few to the Bob Marshall Wilderness Foundation to hopefully, auction off or do whatever they'd like, hang them wherever they want, whatever. So yeah, here it is. It's called River Theology. This was once a sea until algae breathed an atmosphere that now cradles us in a valley of billion-year-old belt rock, holding first and last light, larch and alder, grizzly and deer, yarrow and lupine, a river rippling the last waves of that ocean, writing the scripture of glaciers on stone, staining the color of this ravine's birth ritual. I sit on a ledge where a dam was to be built, creating a make-believe ocean that would never recede, swallowing, bloating into a gray mirror stillness, drowning the maps of our makings. And I'm grateful for concrete never poured, and watch water gather joy like Red Sky Mountain gathers light. And I read deadwood stretched across the islet, trying to translate this year's spring flood gospel, and rejoice in joining this wilderness congregation, a sinuous fellowship of faith in the next bend, of following the downstream mystery and desire to do something as radical as flow over rock, swirling life into forest at night, deep pools of bull trout ghosts and cutthroats, slicing erratics into a river theology, shaping our path through this land, sculpting us as we return to sea. So, it's river theology.
Thank you, Michael. I love that. I love the idea that like it's all a process of trying to translate something, right? And to turn this world that we're in into a prayer or a translation or a scripture. And man, it's hard. It's hard, but that's a beautiful homage to it. Thank you.
It means a lot.
James, do you want to take us on a trip to your artwork?
Sure, yeah, I'll give a little bit of the background behind what I'm going to share. One thing that I really wanted to do with this residency was explore place and the story of place. I was lucky enough before my residency to talk with a member of the Salish tribe whose it's the ancestral land of the Salish where we stayed. And that really helped me sort of come up with the ideas of like, what am I going to try to find out here? What do I want to learn from the landscape? So early on in my residency, I realized that I was going back to the same several spots really close to the cabin. And I guess, gained a knowledge through just being in these places. So what I created, and I'll share with you now, it's it's known as a cognitive map, or this is sort of my map of the area that I came to know. Is this good? Should I zoom in a little bit? See if I can do that.
Maybe, show us around a little bit. I mean, I think we can all see it, but yeah, if you want to go into particular spots, that'd be cool.
Sure. So this is also the first time I've used watercolor in probably 5 years. Every year or so, I try watercolor thinking it can't be that hard. And then I realized, yeah, it's really hard. That's why I don't do it. So it's very little bit of watercolor, but I use that to sort of make my own map of the places and what I learned from these places. So we start at the bottom, if everyone can see that. There's Granite Cabin, and it's my own names for all the little places that I went to, and most of them are on the river. I named every pool that I saw,
Nice.
every little bar, every little spot in the forest that I can think of that I went to that had meaning to me. And another part of this was another book I read when I was out there is called Wisdom Sits in Places by Keith Basso. It's about Western Apache language and how they really carry everything they know, their language, their knowledge of history is through language. And there were some passages that really struck me about how Western Apache, and I would think that most indigenous people say that placemaking or place naming it's really a form of narrative art that or storytelling. So I hope that years from now, when I look at this map and remember, for instance, Slow Pool, the fact that I've named Slow Pool, I hope that I can remember that, almost travel back in my mind and remember, like, oh yeah, that was Slow Pool, and sort of travel through time. And in a sense, that's what I want to do with my art, is try to connect people to these places and why they're important to me, and maybe why we should all care about them also. So this was a sort of a fun little task I did when I was out there. And it's really, like I said, I only did a bunch of sketching out there. I haven't really finished any paintings, but this was a really fun exercise to do out there. And it's something that I'm going to frame, and it'll be part of the exhibit that I'm going to do to hopefully take people into the world of, this was what I knew. This is probably less than 1 square mile. And this is everything that meant a lot to me. This is taught me a lot about the wilderness. It taught me a lot about the stories that this wilderness is trying to tell me, from geological time to what trees grow here, who lives here, and then through the human interaction, like why is this trail here? Why is Granite Cabin here? I hope it will somehow tie everything together, which I'm not sure how I'm going to do yet, but I'm hoping that the work that I produce is going to do that.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I really love that, James. I love like the idea that naming is narrative art, and also like that it was like bright pool and rest pool, which are so simple, but like, I don't know, so evocative of what those places must have been like.
It sort of harken back to my childhood, where I remember I've done this for as long as I can remember, going back to swimming holes where I grew up. If I mention the 90s or the bridge pool to my friends, we'll know exactly what that is, and it'll, at least for me, it takes me back to being a kid and spending summer afternoons at the river. And yeah, it's really meaningful and creates some kind of a story behind it.
I wanted to jump in here, James. I think it's really cool that a step in your process here was to stop and visit with a member of the Salish people, recognizing it's not just their ancestral lands, but still their home, Northwest Montana. And I find it very interesting in your cognitive map too. I've been having a lot of conversations with somebody who's working hard to keep the Blackfeet language alive, that so much of that language is sort of action or verb related versus ours, which tends to be noun related. And most of your own place names for that had an action to them, lat pool, slow pool. I think it's really cool that connection that you had a name that sort of almost would mirror how a place would have been described by cultures that are here and were here long before European culture got here.
Yeah, thanks, Bill.
Yeah, I really, really like that, James. I said I would read a poem too, so I'll do that, and then we'll take some more of these awesome questions that are sitting in the Q&A, waiting for us to love on them. And just for a little bit of context for this poem, so my residency, I was in a little cabin in the Rogue Wilderness in Oregon on a site that had been homesteaded in the late 19th century, and the homesteader had planted an apple orchard. And so I had this 100-year-old orchard that was just going gangbusters. I just had this like perfect pollination season and perfect apple season, and was just drowning in apples. And it was me and the black bears out there to enjoy this whole orchard. And I really, as one of my rituals, like to make apple butter every fall if I can. But what I usually do to make apple butter is like put apples in a crock pot for a few hours and then like put them in a blender. And I was totally off grid, and I didn't have those things. But I had a propane stove and I had a diesel generator. And I did bring an immersion blender. I don't know why, but I brought it. And so I used my generator to blend my apples, and that got me thinking about sort of safety and danger and the fine lines between those things, and kind of survival and hope. And so this poem is called "Using a Generator Indoors Can Kill You in Minutes." Using a generator indoors can kill you in minutes, I read on the big red and black Honda before firing it up inside, right next to the propane stove. Because it is fall and the birds know it and wing away, just as the lizards in the woodpile know, and slow their scuttling, while the walnut knows, and in the strange way of the world, seals off its own leaves to die by draining from them the blood of the sun. And the apple trees know and unburden themselves, and I am turning their year's work into butter, because little in the world strikes me as holy wealth so much as food jarred in clean glass, which I am lucky to find in a year where the whole unlucky nation has turned to canning like the metaphor it is. A year I spent mostly watching the wind, which churns now in the forest, calving limbs from trees to lay across the road, which will necessitate the use of another tool that could at any moment lead me to dusty death, that old unreliable chainsaw, toothy as a bear trap, with its orange warning sticker of an arm shorn of its hand. Though wouldn't it be handy if the world itself came with a warning, telling us what is safe, what dangerous, crisp clear as one sweet apple and one tart, which is how you make the butter best worth saving, sealed tight with a bright ba-ting that means tomorrow and perhaps tomorrow. Eden, I feel like you had like some objects that you didn't get to show because we were talking about that piece that's not available. Did you want to show any of those before?
Yeah, I made another piece which is based on that experience, but I still have. So I'll try and turn this around here, knocking everything over. The name of this piece is actually Glacier, just because to me it looks like a glacier. I don't know. Tell me if you can see that. Is that good? No.
Go there. Yeah, that's getting there. That's good. Cool. Eden, you're on mute. I think you must have clicked a button while you're swinging your computer.
Sorry.
There we go.
Yeah, I'm not a zoomer. Okay. Here, I got an idea. Hold on a second. Is that good?
That works, yeah.
Okay. It's a little heavy, but so the inside of this piece, I don't know if you can see that texture. That's from a rock out on the island below the cabin there. So basically, I made a silicone mold of this rock, and then I inverted it. So this is like an inside-out rock, if that makes any sense. And then this texture here is from the farm in Iowa. It's a huge leaf. And then this is corn, kernels of corn. But, and this stick, these legs, there was a beaver chewed on stick, which I used to kind of, you know, just kind of help me pick my way through the rocks. And to me, this piece, it's a vessel. And I like making vessels because they hold experiences. I mean, you know, they obviously, their purpose is to hold and maintain. And it holds a memory, and to me, it holds transition between and my other life, you know, the practical life, the life of the farm in Iowa, and the vegetation, and then like just the agriculture, and how the wilderness was gone from Iowa pretty much. I mean, it's still there, but it's a hybrid of man-made influences. And I live in Colorado now. When I did the residency, I lived in Iowa. And I think the residency kind of ruined Iowa for me in a way, because the prairie is so gone. You know, it's so missing. It's so abused. Yeah, there's land coming back. There's pheasants, and you know, there's a lot of effort there. But you know, you live in a ghost of a prairie. It's never the same. Agriculture is something, and I did. You know, it's a wonderful thing humans can do. But this piece is kind of about the coexistence of wilderness and agriculture, and texture and color and all that thrown in the midst. So it has a lot of personal meaning for me because it holds my experience. And this rock, I mean, you can't see it, but this rock texture, I mean, this rock was like the most beautiful rock I'd ever seen in my life. And I had brought a bunch of silicone out there, and I sat there and I made a mold of this rock, and I swam while it was drying. And I mean, this rock and I spent a lot of time together. And so this vessel is about transporting experiences into the physical, you know, and so yeah, it's not all it's about, but it's all I can talk about anyway.
Oh, you've also got there's a beautiful blue patina on there that almost mimics the
Right?
middle fork.
I worked really hard on that. I figured out, I was kind of a little wizard with chemicals on patina, and I got some zinc nitrate, and that was a game changer. I don't know if that means anything to anyone, but it did to me. So yeah.
I think the texture translates pretty well.
I can't see. There's this little tiny square up there.
Looks very cool. Yeah, even on the screen. Yeah, it looks very rocky.
It's a rock. It's an inside out rock.
I love it. Well, I want to try to get to a couple more of these great audience questions. And I love this one. So Kelly Neal asked, did you discover anything about yourself that surprised you?
Oh my God.
And I've had a minute to look at it. So I'll just say one thing that surprised me in my experience was how much my brain can still change. You know, I think we, as adults, we're sort of like, our brains aren't malleable anymore. Like, we're done. We are who we are. We work how we work. And I think that the combination of solitude and slowness and time, like, I know my perception of time changed completely. You know, or the fact that, like, I could read books like I hadn't read books since I was like a third grader bored to death in the summer, who was just like reading to pass the time. Whereas in the wilderness, I was reading to pass the time, but also because it was this great pleasure and sort of like slow ritual. So I think I was amazed by how much my brain could slow down and could change. But what about you guys?
Ooh. It's a big question. It's a great question. I think personally, I'm still processing what I've learned or what I'm learning. I think I'm still learning what I'm learning about myself, if that makes any sense at all. It's still very fresh for me. It was only, I don't know, 3 months ago. It was this summer, you know, for me. So I learned I could be alone for 2 weeks. That was big. You know, I learned that I could be in solitude and be okay, which was big for me. The thing that I'm still grappling with is I learned that I don't necessarily enjoy the 9-to-5 grind. Like, coming back from the wilderness, like, I loved having that sacred time in the morning to wake up and write and be deliberate about my art or whatever it was you want to call it. And now I have to go to work, which I love teaching, but, like, you know, I learned that I really do love that time, especially in the mornings. And I'm still trying to figure out that balance, I think.
If I can jump in, I think that one of the most important things I learned about myself and actually, I'll say, changed while I was out there, not maybe so much since I've gotten back, was just telling myself that it is okay to slow down. It is okay to not be in a hurry. It is okay to relax, because I am, anyone who knows me, I'm pretty diesel power a lot of the times, and anxiety is a large part of my life. And on day maybe 4 or 5, after I decided something's clicked, and I decided, or told myself, hey, you don't have to hike every trail here every day. It's okay to spend a day not going more than 100 yards from the cabin. You'll probably learn a lot more doing that. And once I gave myself permission to do that, which I know sounds strange, but as soon as I did that, a lot changed. Things slowed down. I started to appreciate where I was more. And I wish I was more successful in doing that in my everyday life. And little things I can do. For instance, I'm really trying to not be in a hurry when I'm in my truck, because I carry a little bit of East Coast road rage with me, and if I can do a little bit to stop that, I think that's a small victory, and that's something that I can attribute to my time out at Granite.
I get that. I think, yeah, that's a huge question. But
Mhm.
I think what I realized was there's always a more authentic version of me.
Hmm.
And a lot of that is acknowledging that there are fears of grizzlies, fears of this, stupid fears that have nothing to do with anything, but yet they were there, and how unnecessary they really are. You know, because everyone always says, weren't you scared? Or you must be brave, or how could you do that by yourself? And I was like, yeah, I got this. And I got out there, I was like, whoa, do I got this? You know, and there's always more. Like, you can dig as deep as you want. And the great thing about being alive is there's always more, you know, and that's what it taught me about myself. And it wasn't always pretty. I thought, well, that ain't good to look at, but there it is, you know. It's like, it's funny how you realize how you might look to other people when there's nobody else there. It just makes absolutely no sense, but there it is, you know. Nothing to shield you from your own self. And you just keep going.
Eden, I think you touched on this, but can you attribute your move to Colorado as coming from this experience?
A little bit.
That's
It
a
was
pretty
kind of
big life
already in the
change.
plans, but yeah, it was a clincher for sure. Because now I live where I can go up to the Sangre de Cristos. They're right out my back door, and I ride my horse all the time, and I'm on that path. There's always more. There's always more to explore, you know. And art to me is wilderness, and wilderness is art. There's just like this never ending. The residency opened these huge gates. And it encouraged me to make this move. I mean, I was pretty embedded in this farm. I mean, it's a farm, you know, it was a big deal and totally life-changing. So it gave me the confidence to do it, basically.
That's really great to hear. That makes me feel better about the things that I'm grappling with right now. And also what Corrie said earlier about being, your mind can change, or your feelings, your brain can change over years. You can't, it can be different.
Michael, I identify so much with what you're saying, because I feel like my experience just like ruined me for for civilization, right? Like, it just spoiled me completely. And like, when I left, I said to my partner, I was like, did wild Corrie die? Like, did I like leave her there? And am I like in a new like instar of my insect life? Like, and I was like, no, like she didn't die, but like, you know, she can come back, but like, can I cultivate some of her good habits, like letter writing and time affluence and not looking at my phone? And it's hard to see that possibility and that change in yourself and then keep it.
Speaking of which, I owe you and Jory a letter. I think
I know,
Jory
I saw Jory's on here. Hi, Jory Mickelson. A great poet and the best pen pal I've ever had, who wrote to me regularly during my wilderness experience, and I think Michael, yours as well.
I got some letters from Jory as well. I think it's funny that you mentioned that, like the wild Corrie. I'm working on an essay right now, and the end of it's like, I feel like every time we go on a journey or an exploration, like do we leave something behind? You know, we come back from this and like, are we whole again? Or, you know, like we're not, right? Like there's always something we leave behind, you know, and can you reach back to that? Or, you know, where is that? Or where can you go? How can I'm still trying to articulate it. But I do wonder, you know, what part of me did I leave behind there? And what part of me what new part of me grew, you know? I keep coming back to this image. I don't know if this is going to connect at all, so I apologize for the ramble. But like when you walk into Spruce Park, you pass through this old burn, and there's these larch that are just like, I think over 100 years old. Please correct me if I'm wrong, the people who actually know. But like, and they still have the burn scars from the fire like 100 years ago, and I just like, I love that. And I don't know how that connects to what I was just saying, but like, I do wonder, like, I don't know, is there a scar or like a mark from this experience that I'm going to will grow with me? Or
yeah, or like the way it made me think about how like tree rings reflect like the condition of the year of growth, right? Like if it's a drought or if it's wet. So like, what do our tree rings look like for our time in the wilderness? Yeah.
I remember when I was getting ready to leave Iowa, we lived right on the Cedar River. And I was just standing there on the riverbank, And I was thinking, you know, I've had a physical impact on this land. I mean, how can you not? But I was thinking, does it really matter in a larger cosmic sense that I lived here? You know, what will I have left behind besides improvements I did to the land or whatever? But just, what does it matter? Does it matter? You know, does the land have a memory? Does the whole, all the beings, all the animals, everybody who's lived there and passed through there, you know, what does it take to leave a little bit of yourself on the land? And I realized it's kind of the ability to let the land mark you, and it becomes like a two-way flow. And I do believe that, you know, and I feel like a little part of me still at Spruce Park.
Same. Yeah.
You know, and it's still up on that mountain when I was looking around, and there's just like a certainty to that that is unquestionable to me.
I can't wait for years down the road when I go back to the ledge at Spruce Park and I meet what I left behind there. Like, I know there's part of me that's still sitting there drinking coffee in the morning, you know. Someday I'll go back.
I saw you there. No.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sounds like a reunion might have to happen.
Yeah. Oh, that's a
All for
great idea. Yeah. Well, speaking of leaving things behind, I can't believe like we're almost out of time, and it's just been such a pleasure to visit with you guys. Bill, do we have time for one more question, or should I pass it to you?
No, please, by all means.
Okay. I was just going to ask one more quick one. That's basically if you artists can sort of close by sharing like a little prompt or practice, or, you know, a sentence that you used while you were out there in your residency that was helpful or generative for you, that maybe other people could kind of take inspiration from and take with them.
I can jump in. It's what I said a little while ago, which was give yourself permission to relax, give yourself permission to slow down and notice things. That's helped me a ton. So that would be, I don't know, words to the wise, I don't know. But that would be my contribution.
This kind of goes back to what we said earlier about ritual and prayer. And I think daily I realized that like gratitude is my favorite form of prayer. So I try to find, I was just so grateful for just so much during that time period. So I just kept just trying to acknowledge that. And I also, like, as for practice for writing that I'm pulling every day now, is like I carry like a little, this is actually the notebook I had with me, but I have these like little field notes that I keep literally in my back pocket. So like I'm in the middle of teaching whatever rhetoric and I'll pull it out and I'll write something down. Like I'm always trying to gather now. And I think that's become much a practice, a daily practice for me. I've taken that gathering idea I had out in the wilderness and tried to do make it a daily ritual as well. So that's been very helpful.
I think I kind of pull from what both of you guys just said. Like to me, what I took with me was to watch the sunrise and the sunset every day in my normal life, and the moon, and to keep track of the moon. I mean, how lucky are we to have a moon to watch? And before that, I was like, whatever, yeah, the moon's in what phase? What do you call that? You know, but now I pay attention to it and I assign like sacredness to just really small things, and to let go of trying to control methodologies, and to let things kind of, to realize I'm not the biggest factor in the world, you know, to let the world play on me instead of trying to make my play on the world. And humility, you know, to embrace humility a bit. I could go on and on. I mean, there's so many things this residency taught me, but you know, just like James said, just to let time manage you, you know, it's great.
Yeah. I had a little quote that was on my cupboard in my residency, and it's on my office wall, and it's an Annie Dillard quote, and it says, "You were made and set here to give voice to this, your own astonishment." I feel like that was my thing. It's like, where's my wonder and where's my astonishment every day? Thank you so much, you guys, and sorry to the questions that we didn't get to because they were all great. And thanks everybody who was here. And I will pass it back to Bill to wrap things up.
Well, let me first also add my thanks, Eden, James, Michael, for agreeing to be a part of this, and Corrie, to you, just the richness of our team at the Bob Marshall Wilderness Foundation, having you on our board to lead, guide, facilitate such an important conversation and be such a rich participant in the conversation. So Corrie, thank you for doing that, and you three for sharing it. The themes are amazing. What's funny is it goes beyond our Artist Wilderness Connection program. A lot of the themes you all talk about, we hear and see in the writings of our interns that spend a summer on our Wilderness Conservation Corps, or crew leaders that spend a summer leading our volunteers. You know, the word that always comes to mind for me is the human aspect of wilderness is transformation. There's a transformation that happens if you let it, if you go spend time in a place like the Bob. And I want to thank all of our attendees tonight for coming and listening to such a rich conversation. And I really want to thank our partners that are the driving force behind the Artist Wilderness Connection program. A couple of them have been with us all night, Teresa and Coulter from the Forest Service. Thanks for being here tonight. Our friends at Swan Valley Connections and also the Hockaday Museum of Art in Kalispell. Such a great partnership that we enjoy having with those partners. This winter, we'll be reopening up the application process for a couple artists to join us next summer and have these same sort of experiences. I also think this is an important place to note that, as Eden referred to earlier, we lost a really big part of this Wilderness Artist Connection program when Andy Breland passed away in the last year. Andy, the one thing he loved to do was to pack our artists in and out. It was a sad day when we lost Andy. We certainly carry him with us in our hearts every day as we continue this program and so many others. A reminder that our work is possible because of the generous support of folks like you all. And earlier in the chat, I put in a link to our auction that we have going on, the Voices of the Wilderness Silent Auction. It closes out in about 24 and a half hours from now, tomorrow night at 9 o'clock Mountain Time. So if you want to follow that link or just go to our website, bmwf.org, you can find your way to the auction. And also you can, if you would prefer to just donate, you can go to the donate button there on our website. But we certainly appreciate all that support, appreciate all of you who came tonight, asked such great questions, and to our panelists, to Corrie, our host. Thank you for just a wonderful, rich evening. And we look forward to seeing you all next year at Voices of the Wilderness and maybe on one of our volunteer adventure trips next summer or as one of our artists in the future. So thanks for coming, everybody. And you all have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.